Hey, book lovers. Want to hear a story? Welcome back to Storytime with Em. This is a mini episode from Em's Books and Cats podcast, where I am sharing my book, SuperGym, a chapter a week. A quick warning, SuperGym contains mature content and may not be suitable for everyone. So proceed with caution. Otherwise, please enjoy Chapter 16 of SuperGym. Maggie was participating in a group exercise class at the SuperGym, just like any other day. The room was painted white, and the walls shone from the sunlight that slipped in through the high, small windows. Sunlight. Famicili hadn't seen the sun in years. She wasn't sure how many exactly. Time wasn't important anymore. Mr. Pratt had streamlined their lives. They ate, slept, and exercised based on alarms that blared through the city. Maggie didn't remember arriving at class. She was sweaty, but her muscles didn't hurt. It had to be early in the program. She went through the motions without thinking. In front of her, rows of purple and green-clad bodies were jumping, over and over, in perfect unison. A round man 3 rows up fell behind. His feet didn't leave the ground. He bent over and retched. His hands rested heavily on his knees. He was surrounded in an instant. 2 burly trainers escorted him from the room despite his wheezy cries of protest. The pace increased. It took a few minutes for the clients to catch up, and the perfect rows wavered for a moment. The clients got back on pace quickly. Massive, muscular men stalked the outer edges of the group, waiting for the next client to fall. Maggie still couldn't feel her muscles. Was it a side effect of the cleanse? Something that makes you pain-free? Doubtful. Other Maggie had a point. Pain-free was not a common existence for the clients of the SuperGym. Maggie couldn't remember the last time she hadn't been in some kind of physical pain. She dropped down into a push-up position as the lead trainer cued them. Bodies dropped all around her amidst the sound of soft groans. She looked up for just a moment, and the world changed. The clients lay prone on steel tables. There were tubes running from their bodies to beeping machines. Dietitians in their pristine lab coats surrounded one table. They poked at the body with shiny instruments and murmured softly. A moment later it was gone. Maggie was still on the floor. Bodies rose and fell around her. A massive hulk of muscle was watching. He took a few steps in her direction. She shook her head and turned her eyes to the floor. She lifted her body up with surprising ease. Push-ups were usually a battle. She kept the pace and ignored everyone else around her. They wouldn't break her today. A pair of bright green sneakers edged their way into her line of sight. She knew those shoes, but it couldn't be the same ones. Hesitantly, she dropped to her knees and looked up. Tessa stood grinning above her. She shook her head and her sleek ponytail bobbed. Maggie remembered how Tessa looked when she'd last seen her. The ponytail lifeless and sticky with dark blood. Slacking on the push-ups as usual, Maggie. You know what happens if you stop. No, please. Maggie tried to rejoin the group, but Tessa wouldn't let her. Her small hands clamped tightly on Maggie's voluminous upper arms. She lifted her to her feet with very little effort. Maggie couldn't feel Tessa's fingers, but her flesh was white under her grip. Too late for that now. You know better than to stop. She was grinning. Her face was gaunt and her tan had faded. There was a look of desperation in her eyes that made Maggie nervous. Tessa was always reserved, always cool and collected. Maggie didn't know this wild-eyed girl dressed in a wrinkled trainer uniform. There were spots on the shirt, tiny brownish specks. They seemed to be growing in size as Maggie watched. Tessa tapped a finger on her tablet and motioned to Maggie. Follow me. Where are we going? Maggie knew where they were going. She didn't really need to ask. Tessa laughed. She seemed to choke on the sound. Tessa was very close to the edge. One-way ticket to fat camp, you know that. I'm not going to fat camp. I can't. Mr. Pratt won't let it happen. Tessa looked grim. They had reached the edge of the group, and she motioned Maggie toward the door. She waited until it clicked shut behind her, and they were alone in a short hallway. Tessa was looking around wildly, and Maggie realized that there were no cameras in this hall. Tessa fixed her eyes on Maggie. I figured it out. Maggie waited, but Tessa didn't say anything more. What? You. I figured it out. Her eyes gleamed and her breath came in short bursts. Everyone wants to know about you. Why are you special? What keeps you safe from Mr. Pratt's madness? I've spent so long thinking about it. About you. You know what I found out? She was leaning in close. Maggie towered over her tiny frame, but the look in Tessa's eyes frightened her. You're not special. Tessa grinned triumphantly. That's the big secret. You're just like everyone else. She leaned in closer. Don't let Mr. Pratt find out. If he figures it out, you're dead. Game over. I don't understand. I couldn't see it before, but here everything makes more sense. The door opened behind Maggie, and Tessa's eyes went wide. Fear swept over Maggie in a cold wave, and she didn't dare to turn around. I'm sorry, Maggie. Tessa walked away. She didn't look back. Her silhouette grew faint and shimmered as she moved down the hall. A hand clamped on Maggie's shoulder and began shaking her. She was back in the food lab. She could smell the slime. It was cold. It filled her stomach and blocked her airway. She was drowning in it, dying. The next moment she erupted. The pristine walls were coated with green and black sludge, and it wouldn't stop. She would have done anything to make it stop. It was only when the sludge was tinged with blood that she mercifully passed out. Then she was in another room. Everything was shiny. The bright fluorescent lights bounced off the metallic surfaces of the walls and tables. She tried to sit up, but there was a flash of red. Stars blinded her momentarily, and a searing pain shot through her skull. Maggie's vision returned slowly. She was still on her back. Heavy chains were tied loosely around her, but the weight was too much. She couldn't move. There was another girl in the room, but this girl wasn't chained. She was sitting on the other bed and swinging her feet. Her ankles were bony and covered with blue veins. They were all Maggie could see clearly. Help me. She barely recognized her own voice. Her throat was raw, and her words came out like the scrape of a match. It hurt to speak. The other girl giggled. 54467. Her voice was a whisper, but Maggie recognized it. She tried to sit up, and the lights exploded in front of her eyes again. It's your client number, stupid. There is no girl. Maggie struggled to clear the murkiness from her mind. Everything was so vague and fuzzy. Who did she sound like? She knew the voice. She had heard it often enough. Chiding, sarcastic. The girl was other Maggie. How long had she been unconscious? The chains were gone. Maggie sat up groggily and looked around. Thor's house. Was this real? She couldn't tell her dreams from reality anymore. She was sprawled across a pile of blankets on the kitchen floor. Her head was screaming. She gingerly touched her forehead, and it was crusted with dried blood. That bastard. It's almost his turn. Soon. She could hear Thor moving around upstairs. She got painfully to her hands and knees and tried to stand. Her legs were shaky and weak. They collapsed the first time, but on the second try they held. Her muscles wobbled under her weight as she moved unsteadily to the door. Locked. He was coming. No time to escape. She went back to her place on the floor and pretended to sleep. Thor was unpredictable. She had been momentarily confused by his kindness, but he was back to normal. Or worse. She lightly touched her forehead again, and another bolt of pain made her eyes tear and fill with bright specks of light. Thor's rage was terrifying. She had no idea what was coming next. Just play along. Not him. Not yet. Not very helpful, other Maggie. Trust me. She tried to remain motionless. Thor's steps rang on the metal stairs. The man could not move stealthily. Every step thundered and announced his arrival. He would have been a terrible dietitian. Those creeps moved without a sound. They were always creeping around in the shadows. A sudden blow to her ribs made her cry out and curl into a ball. Thor was standing beside her. Get up. It's time to work out. Great, he's in one of his moods. What's next? Thor had not lived up to Maggie's expectations. His strict adherence to the SuperGym rules was legendary, but he had been violently unpredictable since they had started working together. He bent the rules to fit his mood, and they could change in an instant. His demeanor was dark today. She didn't move. She barely breathed. When he was like this, any little thing could set him off. He was distracted this morning, and he gave her another half-hearted kick and crossed the room quickly. He slid open the glass door and stepped outside. Maggie didn't have any clothes, so she wrapped herself in one of his blankets and hurried after him. The wind was cold and biting. She clutched the thin blanket and shivered violently. She had to run to keep up with him, and the blanket flapped around her wildly. Drop the damn blanket. You look ridiculous. But I'm naked. So? I bet half the city's seen you naked. Maggie let the blanket fall. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She would never let Thor see her weakness. He would not win. She ran faster. It hurt. Her breasts bounced painfully. Rocks and bits of broken glass littered the ground, and her feet were cut and bleeding. Her head ached, and she felt herself going in and out of consciousness. She tripped and fell hard onto her hands and knees. Thor finally stopped running. You are pathetic. Come here. He picked her up and threw her over one shoulder. He ran the rest of the way into the city, carrying her across his back. The blood rushed to her head and made the pain almost unbearable. Each bouncing step caused a new flash of agony. Clients stared as he ran through the streets, but they were smart enough to look away. No one wanted to tangle with SuperGym's head trainer. He dropped her on the floor of the SuperGym in a heap, and she crawled to the locker room. She put on another hideous SuperGym outfit and paused for a moment to examine her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was matted with blood. Her face was gray and sunken. She looked like hell. Hurry up. Thor's voice echoed through the empty locker room. No time to fix it now. Maybe her sweat would wash away the blood. She took one last glance at the mirror and went out for her daily torture. What took you so long? Just admiring your handiwork. You were already beaten when I found you. How did I get to your house? I remember being in the food labs, I think. Then I woke up to you raping me. I didn't rape you. Really? I don't remember asking you to slam me headfirst into a wall. You liked it and you know it. Bastard. Maggie's hands balled into fists at her sides. Her fingernails dug painfully into the flesh of her palms. One thing is certain. Thor liked it. You can use this. Be calm. Play along. He already wants you. Make him love you. Maggie didn't think it would work. Thor wasn't capable of love. Still, she knew she had to try. He had been kind to her once. Maybe it wasn't a fluke. If she could get him on her side, she might be able to escape Famicili. The wall was constantly on her mind. Freedom was on the other side, and she intended to see it, no matter what she had to do to get there. You're right, she agreed, and she laughed at his expression. Don't look so shocked. You're not the only one who likes it rough. Just next time, don't knock me out. This was a gamble, but she needed information. We'll stay away from the walls, he smiled. Just like that, he was hers. Maggie was surprised. She'd expected more of a challenge. Thor wasn't just a trainer, he was a god. His will was strong, and he was rumored to be unbreakable. But she'd found the chink in his armor. She'd gotten in, and now she would break him. Well, how about now? She leaned on the treadmill and tried to look sexy despite her bloody hair and ill-fitting SuperGym uniform, but Thor shook his head. He was still smiling. Not now. You've got a workout to do. We could count that as a workout. Later. That's extra credit. Stay calm. Soon. Just play along. Lucky me. He snapped back into trainer mode. Maggie's heart was soon pounding in her ears, but the exercise seemed a little easier. She felt light and strong. She had a goal, a purpose, and she knew what she needed to do. The plan was so obvious. She could see every step laid out before her. This was going to be easy. She would have freedom in a week, 2 at the most. 3 hours later, Maggie staggered into the locker room. Every muscle was shaking. Her uncomfortable outfit was drenched in sweat and clung to her in unflattering places. She peeled off her clothes and stepped into a shower stall. She turned the water as hot as it would go. The scalding water felt good on her tired muscles. She closed her eyes and put her face up into the spray. Large, rough hands covered her breasts. Thor. She didn't scream. She had learned to never scream. Could be worse. Play along. Other Maggie was right. It could always be worse. Mr. Pratt would have been worse. The man was wrinkled and surprisingly paunchy for being a health guru. He smelled like old protein shakes and grunted like a pig when he abused her. Yes, things could always be worse. Maggie had loved someone once. Even now, the pain of losing him far outweighed the frequent surprise attacks. They had been young and stupid and in love. There had still been hope. Benjamin Pratt had already been sworn in, but the scope of his power had not yet become apparent. People were still different shapes and sizes. They still had occupations that had nothing to do with food or fitness. Everyone was blindly living their lives as the SuperGyms quietly infiltrated the city. Maggie couldn't remember how many years it had been. It felt like a lifetime. His name was Casey. He wasn't an exciting guy. He mostly played video games and read comics, but they had fun together. He made her laugh, and she loved him in a way that was both exhilarating and painful. He was killed during the first wave of cleanses. He reacted poorly to the detox drink, and for several agonizing days his body swelled. His skin turned purple, stretched, and eventually split. His airway was cut off, and he suffocated in his apartment. Maggie couldn't help him. Only his trainer could change his detox plan, and Andy refused. She loathed Maggie and took obvious pleasure in letting her lover suffer and die. Andy vanished after Casey died. Maggie heard she had been reassigned. Not demoted, not sent to train the dregs of society at fat camp. No, Andy had moved up the SuperGym ladder. Killing Casey had earned her respect and admiration. Maggie vowed to kill Andy if she ever saw her again, but she never had. The woman had become a ghost, and the memory haunted her still. Thor finished quickly and left her alone in the shower. Maggie sighed with relief. The water was going cold, but she stayed in as long as she could stand it. Thor had left her a gift in her locker. Yoga pants, a sports bra, and a shirt. All black. Slimming, and a far better option than the hideous SuperGym uniforms. She emerged from the locker room in her new outfit, but Thor was gone. He had returned to his secret dark tower in the woods. Maggie was disappointed. She had hoped to go with him. She wanted to be closer to the wall, to see it again, if possible. She needed another look. There had to be a second door somewhere. But it was too soon. She knew it was better that Thor had gone without her. They were all watching her closely. She couldn't go back to the wall. Not yet. They would be waiting for her. Play along. 1 level complete. You found the wall. Now wait. Just a little longer. Maggie sighed and passed through the sliding glass doors. The world flashed green and purple under the light of the SuperGym sign. The evening was warm, but she shivered. She would wait. It would be a struggle, but she would endure. She had nothing but time. She needed to return to her new apartment and follow her plan without complaint. It was in her nature to rebel, but Maggie knew she couldn't. Not this time. She was playing a dangerous game, and her life was the prize. She had always taken her special treatment for granted. She hadn't really cared if she lived or died. Finding the wall had revitalized her. It gave her a reason to survive, a reason to hope. There was a new life waiting for her on the other side. She just needed to bide her time. What about the dream? What if Tessa is right? Tessa is dead. Maggie knew it was true. She'd seen her in the growing pool of blood. She'd felt the bones crumple under her hand. Believing in dreams was worthless, yet she couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Tessa's message disturbed her. It was exactly what she had always feared was true, that there was nothing special about her, that she was horribly average, and someday everyone would find out. Her stomach grumbled. Her diet plan had been changed again. So far it consisted of eating nothing. No fruits, no vegetables, nothing. She was still allowed water, in moderation. Maggie hated it. Her appetite had always been ferocious. It grew worse the longer she deprived herself. The hunger pains were almost unbearable at times, but she had to admit it was working. Her stomach was shrinking at a satisfying pace. If she could just get rid of the loose skin, she'd be happy. Mr. Pratt would be pleased. She didn't want him to find her attractive, but she needed to keep him happy, at least for a little while. Just a little longer. Make yourself attractive. Deal with the repercussions. Keeping him happy keeps you safe. For now. Keep playing. She jogged home. The air was heavy and hot. The humidity made it difficult to breathe. It was like breathing through wet wool. Her lungs burned and she struggled to get enough air. She huffed and puffed to her apartment and found her bike chained up outside. How did that get there? Trent. Her heart fluttered a little. Maggie grabbed her chest in fear. Was she having a heart attack? No, you idiot. They're feelings. Real feelings. It had been a long time since she'd felt anything. Her emotions had been buried deep since Casey died. She thought they were gone for good. There was something about Trent that brought it all back. Their meeting had been brief, but it had sparked something. Are you sure you want to fall for him? He's the enemy. Shut up, other Maggie. Trent was different. She knew it in her heart. Her cheeks flushed as she let herself into the apartment. He had been so kind to her, so gentle. He had handled her as tenderly as he could. Trent would help her. If she could just see him again, she knew he would save her. He would help her get to the other side of the wall. It could be a trap. No one is going to save you. He's just another SuperGym goon. No, he's different. You can't be sure. Don't go to him. Not yet. Just play along for a little longer. Follow the plan. It won't be long now. Look out! Maggie froze. There was someone else in the apartment. A dark, hulking shadow blocked the faint light coming from the window. She snapped on the light. Trent stood with his hands clasped behind his back. For a moment, she lost control. A smile broke out across her face, and she opened her mouth to speak. But he turned to her, and she stopped the words on her lips. His expression was blank. He didn't recognize her. Maggie's heart dropped. She felt sick to her stomach. How could he not remember her? There was another person in the room. She had been too focused on Trent to notice. Dr. Clyde was seated at the table with his ever-present tablet, and he was watching her intently. The light reflected off his glasses and obscured his face, but she saw enough. He knows. There is something between you and Trent, and he has seen it. That's all it will take to destroy you both. Game over. It happened fast. Dr. Clyde's head snapped back. His tablet flew into the air and smashed into his face. His glasses exploded into tiny shards, and his face ran red with blood. He screamed and clawed at his eyes. One came loose and hung from the socket. Maggie's hands were tingling. Her stomach turned over. The room was spinning at a dizzying pace, and there was blood everywhere. Stop it. Stop it now. Dr. Clyde slipped in the blood that was pooling at his feet. He fell onto the corner of the metal table. The sharp edge sliced open his throat, and dark waves of blood poured from the wound. He bled out in seconds. Trent watched it all with a placid, unreadable expression. Dr. Clyde gurgled one last time and lay still. Trent crossed the room and nudged him with the toe of his sneaker. "You shouldn't have done that." He took a step back to avoid getting blood on his pristine white shoes. "What are you talking about?" He smiled and put his hand on her cheek. Her heart was pounding in her ears. She could barely breathe. Trent looked into her eyes. "You don't have to lie to me, Maggie. I know what you are." "You do? How? I don't even know what I am." "You're fascinating. No one can figure out what makes you tick. I'd like the chance to find out." He smiled shyly and kissed her. There was no violence in his kiss. It was soft and searching. She wrapped her arms around his neck and felt her soul intertwine with his. His hands fumbled with her shirt and pulled it off. The rest of her clothes quickly followed. He brought her to the bed and crawled carefully on top of her. He entered her gently, and his hips made small circles that brought wave after wave of pleasure. She wrapped her legs around him and pulled him deeper. Her nails raked his back as their hips moved together. He looked down at her and their eyes locked. His pace quickened, and she matched him until he shuddered and went limp on top of her. He rolled off her and stood beside the bed with his hands on his hips. He looked like the pictures she'd seen of ancient statues. His body could have been carved from marble. His dark hair was damp and curled at the nape of his neck. He grinned and tossed her clothes onto the bed. "I've been thinking about that since we met." "You were incredible." "Smooth, Maggie, real smooth." Trent grinned wider and pulled on his pants. "Hurry up and get dressed. I need to contact Mr. Pratt about Dr. Clyde's unfortunate accident. This can't happen again, Maggie. At least not for a little while. Can you control it?" "I'll control you." "Yes, I can control it." Liar. Maggie pulled her shirt over her head. "It won't happen again, I promise." "Just don't do it until I tell you to, okay?" He kissed her quickly and turned back to the bloody mess at the table. He shook his head. "Poor Dr. Clyde." He mimed adjusting glasses on his nose. "I am sorry, but he never knew when to mind his own business." "I don't feel sorry for him." "You shouldn't. I know what he did to you." Maggie felt sick. "How do you know?" "Word gets around. Guys talk. Plus, you're kind of amazing." He kissed her again and started to clean up the gore. Maggie didn't want to be amazing. She only wanted Trent. In minutes, he had changed everything. She wanted something more. She had a reason to survive. Her vision was blurred by sudden tears. She wanted to live. Breathe. Don't let him see your weakness. I trust him. Don't. He'll save me. He's my way out. If you say so. Maggie smiled, and Trent smiled back. He kissed her one last time. Then he hoisted Dr. Clyde's body and carried it down the hall to the building's incinerator. And that is the end of Chapter 16, book lovers. I hope you're enjoying SuperGym. I will be back next week with another chapter. Until then, keep reading.